Hey guys, I'm Echoes of Vermin from the Grimdark Compendium, and today I'd love to show you how to take your Grimdark miniatures to the next level, and that's by adding 3 different materials. This is a step above your average game-ready painting, much more suited for special characters or small warbands in skirmish games, and it's perfect if you're looking to take a step further in the Grimdark style. So without further ado, let's dive into cloth, hair and fur application. First, I'd like you to understand the reason behind using these materials. One of the big aspects of the Grimdark style is achieving realistic finishes and texture, of how light interacts with surfaces, and the physicality of certain things, like hair and fur. These materials are extremely hard or nigh impossible to render realistically via standard miniature sculpting means on small-scale models like Warhammer, and so we turn to more unorthodox sources. Pursuing this aspect makes the miniatures look more alive, less like painted figures and more like characters who live in their dark world. Make no mistake though, even though these techniques are mostly easier to approach and get the hang of than traditional sculpting, they require a level of polishing to truly shine. Let's start with the easiest one, and that is cloth. Using different materials for cloth really creates a variation on the model, be it just simple pieces laying on the model, or layered with multiple materials building up the volume of the cloth. There are a few specific materials we use. The rough cheesecloth, its neater cousin sailcloth, normally used in boat modeling, and then we have cigarette paper, and finally, a humble paper tissue, which sees probably the most use thanks to how available and easy it is to shape. The preparation is really easy. First, cut off a shape you need to, and just bathe the paper in a mixture of PVA glue or Mod Podge, thinned roughly 1:1 with water, and a variable amount of texture paste, like muddy ground, depending on how rough and stained you want the paper to become. Now it's really just about shaping the paper. It will start to dry shortly, gluing itself onto the model and keeping its shape. The paper isn't really great at keeping complex shapes unsupported, so it's best used for hanging cloth, capes, cloaks, or layering over existing cloth areas of the model, creating an illusion that the cloth is wholly from this material, making it different from the rest of the plastic, and quite distinct. You layer and tear it, however, but make sure to keep an eye out on weird folds and creases, flattening them by spreading the paper with a wet brush, ideally only having folds where it makes sense. The other material that can be used for cloth is called sailcloth, and it is something normally found in boat modeling. It has a very fine weave and works wonderfully for 28mm scale cloth. The process of application can be much the same. It is just a much sturdier material than paper tissue, so know that it cannot be shaped as freely and also cannot be applied as a one big piece. Due to being tougher though, it can actually hold shape on its own, making it perfect for pieces of cloth that don't sit on the model. Make sure to shape the cloth before it fully dries. The glue mixture can also be applied after, if you are doing something like a waistband. Sailcloth has a tendency to fray when cut, so you have all these loose strings poking out. And maybe you are going for that look, but if not, you can cut off the fraying and make some on purpose with a needle or a similar tool. Is there a way to prevent the fraying? Maybe you want a very neatly shaped cloth. Well, as the fraying happens when you are cutting the sailcloth, we can use Mod Podge to brush it onto the cloth, shaping it as it dries, and cutting it into the final shape then. As the Mod Podge is dry, it keeps all the strings together with no fraying. PVA glue works too, but it is not nearly as strong as Mod Podge. Apply these cuts of dried sailcloth onto the model with superglue. Layer them together for best effect, or with different materials to create more interesting pieces. Cheesecloth doesn't need saying much. Its application is really very similar to paper tissue, so I will just briefly mention some things about it. Cheesecloth can be found in varying sizes with differently tight weaves, but always has a rough texture. The roughest of all these materials for cloth, and for that reason, it's probably best used for decrepit and filthy creatures, or when you want to represent a burlap sack, net, or something similar. What I like to do is actually combining different materials to create some variation, like here, representing some padding that's poking underneath the armor, on top of the paper tissue. I also like how you can position individual strings, creating intentional fraying. And this brings me to the last clothing material, which is cigarette paper. It's an interesting one, having even a finer texture than tissue paper, and being sturdier, but not as shapeable. Note that I found out that different brands of cigarette paper have very distinct properties and they are different from one another, so what you will see here might vary from the local brands that you might find. What I like doing with it is to use it as pretty clean clothing, soaking it in the glue mixture with no texture paint, so it doesn't get any more unneeded texture, and piece by piece, I create parts of clothing. As I mentioned, it's similar to tissue paper, but holds its own shape better, so creating something like sleeves is very easy. Imagine yourself creating a real miniature piece of clothing. What individual parts of that clothing are made out of, and what geometrical shapes they are, before you sew them together. Rolling it up in PVA glue mix, you can also create these little sausages, which can be used to create the illusion of folds. And with stippling motion, you can break up the sausages on the edges and literally integrate them with the paper underneath. Sort of destroying and demolishing them into the paper layer, so it connects, since it's all still wet with the glue. These little sausages are also amazing for creating folds beneath different materials, like with paper tissue shawl here. Look at how I layer it on the neck and then push on paper tissue into the crevices, making sure they are deep enough, and read as folds. If you are looking to create your own shapes that don't rely on existing models, and you don't have sailcloth at hand, what you can do is create some sort of skeleton for cloaks, skirts, and such with wires, tying them around the model, and then layering cigarette paper or any material really on top of the skeleton. Either way with clothing, it's either about creating something that actually really works like real clothing, or at least something that has the illusion of that. Most of the time you are best off combining different materials and building the cloth in layers. Think of what you'd like to create, what would be its shape, and how it would be worn. Does it move in the wind, or does it move with the movement of the character? And since I'm here at this point, you know what else is affected by wind and movement? Hair. You've most likely seen at least one miniature out there on the internet, looking like a character from a stop-motion movie with hair like this. It gives an uncanny look to the miniature, like it's a bit too real and creates something that normal sculpting really can't. It's almost like a small, old puppet. So how do we go about it? Well, there are two main ways we do it. In both approaches, we are mainly using cotton wool, or cotton fiber. I have a big pack of it lying around, but you don't need to buy anything like that. We will use cotton from Q-tips, which you should already have an abundance of at home, whether you already paint with enamels and reductive technique, or keep them in your bathroom cabinet. You can dip Q-tips in an acrylic paint, rolling them in it so it soaks in the color, and as it's drying, but not completely dry, start pulling strings of cotton from it. Pull a lot of them out, so you have a good selection to choose from. and once you've pulled enough of them, look at them all and take your pick of those that feel the coolest, and work with the miniature. Now just apply PVA glue to where you want the hair to be, and stick it on. Wait until the glue dries before modifying the hair in any way, so you accidentally don't pull it off. To an extent, you can bend the strands of cotton or cut loose strings if there are any to clean it up. This is the quicker way for adding hair, and I usually use it if I want to create quick tassels or rough, unwashed and uncombed hair. If it's applied to a head that is fully visible, work little by little, piece by piece to layer the hair slowly, and think about the direction the cotton goes. If you glue the strands in a way that the real hair grows out, it will look much more realistically and believable. There is another, neater variation for this technique too. This one uses cotton wool from Q-tips that were used in the reductive technique, and thus they are stained by the enamel that they soaked. Unlike the first way, these hairs retain much more detail, and they are not stuck together with paint, just stained. Again, we pull it bit by bit, strand by strand, and glue them onto the miniature one at a time. This can be as full as you want, either creating an entire lock of hair piece by piece, or just a few strands that remain on the otherwise bald head. Once the glue is dry, start moving and shaping the hair to their final position. If some are too long, shorten them with small scissors, and shape them with a brush and just clean water. The wetness will help control the hair and make them stay and dry in place. No glue, no varnish, just clean water. Cutting the one end of the cotton strands that you will be gluing will help with application too, and make the hair much more neater, like the character has been taking at least some care of himself. This can of course be used for creating beards too. It's just important to build them patiently, little by little, and layer the hair strands. Bottom to top. Take care of brushing it in the correct direction, and then doing the final styling of shapes. And don't cut all the strands of hair in one go, or it will get a flat edge. Take a few cutting passes, targeting only a couple of hair at a time, so the entire haircut looks more natural. Unless you are doing something like a monk with fresh cut, or something like that. Know that you can adjust the color of the hair even at the very end with very thin enamel paint, as I did near the mustache of this space wolf. The hair can be as neat and finely shaped as you want. It will just take time and patience to get right, building layers slowly, brushing and cutting any hair that refuses to obey. You can even do things like eyebrows, though I do not recommend it. You will go insane. I'm speaking from experience. There is one final material that was used for hair quite recently by Dark Ages, and that is real fur. Plucked from a squirrel pelt. The application is exactly the same as what I've shown you so far. The hair is just not painted in any way. Real fur has a different look from cotton wool, and the only real difference for it here, on the Night Lords, was the final shaping that is done with satin varnish diluted with water, to give the hair a wet appearance, like if you come out of a shower. But I like to use fur as exactly that, fur. Be it for cloaks or animals, nothing looks as good as real animal fur. The way it's shaped, the individual fibers, and how it interacts with light. So how do you apply fur? I bought this squirrel pelt years ago online, and I've had it from then still. One will last you a long time. It's best to pluck the hair from the head first, as they are the shortest and most fine, but I've already used all of them here, so I have to use the longer fur on the back. Because it would be too unwieldy to work with, I shorten it while it's still on the pelt, cutting it in a direction of the hair, so not to create any artificial cuts. Then I take my tweezers and pluck a good bit of the fur, something like this. If the bit you pluck is weird or too small, don't bother adjusting it and just throw it away and try again. The application itself is very similar to the one with hair, applying a dot of glue and placing the bit of fur and pushing one end of the fur into the glue so it connects. You continue doing this bit by bit, one small area at a time, from bottom to top, and in the direction the hair would naturally go. Make sure to clean your tweezers after a few plucks to get rid of any hair and glue residue stuck onto them. I'm mostly using super glue for fur application, but in too hard to reach areas where it's too risky with super glue, I often opt for Mod Podge or PVA glue. You could use that for the whole application, but I prefer the strong grip of superglue. But I have to say superglue is a little tricky, because if you use too much of it at once, or if the one you are using is too thin of a glue, it can run up the hair fibers and stick them together, creating hardened strands that look off. I found it's not a big deal though, especially if you aim to paint the fur at the end, and the hardened strands can be cut off or shortened to not be visible, hidden among the other hair. But maybe try this technique first with Mod Podge or PVA glue, just to get a hang of it and to be less prone to error. Once you cover the entire area, take an airbrush cleaning tool and brush the entire fur. This is to get rid of any loose hair that did not get glued on. A normal brush could work too, but it won't have the same strength. Now, cut the fur on the model itself, shaping it more into its final form. Brush it again after to get rid of loose fibers. It's best to repeat this step a few times until you're happy with how it looks. Once it's ready, sprinkle it with clean water and start brushing again. This will again get rid of some of the loose hair, but the main reason behind this is that the water will help shape the hair into position and making it stay there, same as with the hair application before. Make absolutely sure this step is done at least an hour after the glue is completely cured, otherwise superglue might turn into this nasty white crust and white glue could get reactivated, loosening the hair. The final steps for fur are just stylizing it with final cuts, getting rid of singular hair that stick out, and you can also paint it with inks, contrast paints or washes through an airbrush with very light filters, as to not clump up the fur with paint, and so the fur itself retains its natural sheen. If you don't have an airbrush at hand, you could use thinned enamels to tint the fur, with reductive technique following. The actual color of the fur will just greatly rely on the final tone you achieve, so you have to think about what color of fur you are buying. I've shown the fur application mainly on cloaks here, but the process is exactly the same with living fur. One thing you might have noticed here that all the fur I'm adding is done after the miniature is painted, and that's intentional. You should always apply fur after priming the miniature at the earliest, because if you do it before, you run a very high chance of absolutely killing the fur effect and clogging the hair with primer, especially if you don't prime with an airbrush. And even then, you have to be extremely careful and light-handed, priming the fur lightly, if at all. The same advice goes for the hair application before as well. If this fur application technique is too advanced for you, what you can do is try to opt for an easier option that is very good for creating entire cloaks or fur lining for cloth and such. And that is just cutting a bit of the fur itself with the pelt and gluing it on the model, so you don't run the risk of messing up the fur. Okay, and that would be all I wanted to share with you today. But I do have an opportunity for you to try and apply these materials. Our Grimdark painting challenge has started again, and it's bigger than ever. The Black Chalice is a new overarching painting competition with 4 rounds, 3 of which are qualifiers for the main category at the end of the year. If qualified, you stand a chance to win a cash prize of $5,000, as well as the Black Chalice trophy, among other things. The first qualification round, Carrion Thrones, is open as we speak, with its own bunch of prizes. Head to the Grimdark Compendium website through the link below and learn more about it. We would love you to join. It's our way of giving something back to the community and celebrating what we've achieved, thanks to your support. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you among the entries. Take care, guys.